Hey, good morning. My name is Jason Coyle, Operations Section Chief for Southwest Area Team 1. Today is June 22nd, and this is your morning operational update for the north zone of the Calf Canyon and Hermits Peak fire. Before I get going, I would like to introduce Jasmine. Jasmine is the ASL. That's right over here in my screen. And she's in there giving Vicki an opportunity to have some time off, so appreciate both of them. And today is going to be my last day here on the Calf Canyon Hermits Peak fire. And I really enjoyed the time that I've had to spend with y'all. And hopefully I've been able to provide some some level of comfort and also some information that helps you better understand how it is that we do our job. And we're going to kind of keep with that today as well, close it out. All right, so the fire, we're still reporting it at 341,471 acres, still 72% contained. The number of personnel assigned is 1,852. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about today is information sources as we go through our transition and then as the team that's replacing us transitions. So there is a team coming in behind us, Southwest Area Team 3, and we're working today is what we call a shadow day, and just like it sounds, where they are embedded with each one of the functions from our team to make sure that we transfer the best information possible. One of the analogies this morning that I like is it's the passing of the baton in a relay race. We want to make sure that we give them, that they have got a good solid grip on that baton before we let go of it. And that's what we're working on accomplishing today. We are still going to be amplifying the messages that come out from the different counties and from the National Weather Service as it relates to flooding and the post-fire effects. And the team will still be the primary source of information as it deals with fire-related activities. One thing that I would encourage y'all to do, though, is when you see those links that are important to you, either for the county sources of information, for the National Weather Service that we put up on the page, on the Calf Canyon Hermits Peak fire page, take that information and save that shortcut. And the reason that I would suggest that you do that is that we put that information up as quickly as we're able, depending on what else is going on, but it may be delayed, and there could be a point in time when that delay, it creates an impact. So we want to make sure that you have the right sources of information and that you can get to it as quickly as possible. So for that reason, I just ask that you put it up, I would suggest that you put a shortcut or just cut and paste that into your browser so you have it there so you can go directly to those sites so you can get that information as quickly as you can. And that also is to tell you, if you look down or scroll down our page and we have information that is inconsistent with a more recent post from those different original sources, that you go with what that original source said, especially when it comes to the timing of flooding, anything like that may occur. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is water rights and the impacts that our actions can have on them and what we're doing to minimize those impacts. So, we recognize that water is sacred in northern New Mexico. I mean, it's sacred in a lot of places, but it's especially sacred here. And that there's a lot of lands-based communities that depend on that water for irrigation through the acequias, and that there's that all surface water in New Mexico is owned. When we use water, we are using it. We're using the minimal amount of water we can to accomplish the objectives, and some of those objectives right now are making sure that we can keep a road open so we can get resources in there to be able to reduce or to eliminate the damage that we did with our suppression repair. And in those cases it's a safety issue. We can't have heavy trucks driving back and forth where they're completely browned out, or the road to be so soft that they get stuck in it, or where it just creates the potential for them to slip off while they're moving this equipment or they're moving the material that we removed back down off the hill. We also recognize that our use is small in comparison with the overall impacts that the drought, the lack of snowpack, and just the water levels this time of year have. So we're conscious of that. We know that we contribute, albeit a small part, to the overall scarcity of water, and that we're going to minimize our use to the maximum extent possible while making sure that we can accomplish our objectives. All right, so with that, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So this morning when I was thinking about what to talk about on this, on my last opportunity to speak to y'all, I was looking through LinkedIn, and I came across this story, and it was about a greeter at Walmart that he had been arriving late to work 5, 10, 15 minutes, multiple days in a row. So his boss thought he'd come have a conversation with him. And so it was a retired individual that was the greeter, and so I would assume that his boss was younger than him, the way the story read. And so his boss pulls him in and says, hey, listen, you being 5, 10, 15 minutes late multiple days in a row has, it's had impact on other people on your team. And the older gentleman acknowledged that it had impact, and he said, yeah, I'm going to try to do better. And the boss, not quite satisfied with his answer, was like, well, you used to be in the military, right? And the older gentleman said, yes. He said, so when you were late in the military, then what would they say to you? And the older gentleman grinned at him and said, well, normally they'd say, good morning, Admiral. Can I get you a cup of coffee? So, the assumption, I think, from the boss was that his role in the military, that he had supervisors that were going to hold him accountable for being late. And it just reminded me of the role that assumptions play in the decisions we make, the way that we look at situations and the outcomes. And based on what we talked about the last couple of days, I just wanted to highlight some of the ways that we try to reduce the negative impact of false assumptions in our planning, and how some ways that I think might be useful to y'all out there. So we have to make assumptions, because when we're uncertain about a future state, we have to assume that something's going to happen. And the first example I'll give you is yesterday we assumed that there was going to be flooding in Mora. And fortunately there wasn't. 50 miles to the east, there was 2 inches of rain. So I don't know if lucky is the right word, but the storm track, I'm going to call it lucky, blessed. But the storm track happened to go further east than was anticipated in the modeling. So that 2 inches of rain that could have created a significant catastrophic impact on Mora and Holman in that area instead fell just east of Las Vegas, out there in the country that hasn't been burned. So as many of those bullets as we can dodge, as many of those blessings we can get within the next few weeks, as everyone that's working on this problem continues to improve the mitigations that are in place to reduce the post-fire effects, the better off we're going to be. But that assumption about what was going to occur was made because of the significance of the consequence if that rain would have fallen on Mora. So what we do after we build our plan, like we talked about our PACE plan and making our assumptions and evaluating alternatives, is we red team our plan. And the reason that we do that is that our brains, this guy named Kahneman, these gentlemen, doctors named Kahneman and Tversky, talked about our brain as system 1. That's our rapid way that we just respond to things. And system 2, which is our more thoughtful way. So we kind of want to engage that more thoughtful part of our process and not just jump to conclusions about what it means. The other thing we want to do is we want to avoid bias. So the systemic mental errors that we make when we think something is always that way, Fords are better than Chevys always, I don't know if that's really a bias, but anyways, we make a lot of assumptions that are just based on generalizations that may or may not be true. And if you're interested, you just Google cognitive bias, and you'll get all sorts of lists of the multiple different biases that exist. And the other thing is that we make mental shortcuts, which are really useful, heuristics they're called, but sometimes when you have a complex problem, the greater the degree of complexity, the less useful those heuristics may be if you want to arrive at an accurate outcome. Groupthink. I think it was George Patton that said that when everyone's thinking alike, no one is thinking. So it's another reason we engage in red teaming, is to avoid that groupthink where everybody's just like, yeah, that's what we should do. And then one of my favorite, the Abilene paradox. And if you've never watched the 30-minute movie, it's an old movie, but about the Abilene paradox, it's certainly worth watching. But basically, that's just our desire to preserve group harmony. If Have you ever been in those situations where somebody asks if you want to go do something and you're like, well, if you want to, and the next thing you know, you're all going to do something that none of you wanted to do. And then satisficing. And this is one that when there's a sense of urgency to solving a problem that we have to really resist, if you will, in the fire operations. And that is that you find the first thing that you think is a workable solution, and then you anchor into that and you move forward with it. And why that's a problem is that the time you spend to find the best outcome relative to the amount of work and effort it takes to execute on that, at least in our world is pretty small. So if you just go with the first thing that you think is right because you think you're saving time, and then it was 50% less efficient to execute, or you ended up having to change directions because there's things unforeseen that you hadn't considered, then it's an impact. So those are the things we try to avoid. I bet that some, if not all of you, can think of ways that, I would want to avoid those too. So I'll share with you some of the processes that we use to try to avoid those. The first thing is when we're talking about different alternatives, we engage in this process called yes and. And this is a red teaming tool that it sounds funny, but instead of somebody presenting an idea and you say, no, I think we should do this, you just try to build on each other's idea. And you'd be surprised if you go around a circle of people that are concentrating on solving a problem and you use yes and versus no, I think this is better, how much more of an understanding of the problem and appreciation on what you may be able to do to solve the problem is. The other thing that we do is we ask questions that are designed to not make somebody wrong if they fail, if their plan doesn't work, but expose where those weaknesses are so we can fix them. And one of my favorites is we'll say that if the plan fails, where will it fail, and what can we do to prevent it? So if you're talking about, like, if you developed your PACE plan for your communication for why you're going from point A to point B and what you're gonna do depending on if you're all home or if you're all away, and then you say, if this plan fails, where will it fail? That's the first question. Then we say, well, what if we're here, whatever it is. And they say, okay, so how can we prevent that? And see, right then you've made your plan better. Whatever that is, your plan for protecting your home, plan for communicating with each other, whatever it is. And the other thing we do is we talk about that we acknowledge trade-offs. So the way that works is if we choose to do this, what are we choosing not to do? I'm not saying that we shouldn't choose to do whatever this is, but then you're saying, if we choose to do this, what are we choosing not to do? If we choose to spend today sandbagging the back of the house near the back door, what are we choosing not to do? Well, we're choosing not to clean out the culverts that are on the road adjacent to our house. We're choosing not to, whatever, but acknowledging those trade-offs instead of just letting them kind of be those trade-offs to be assumed, especially if you do that, if you're working together on a problem, there may be trade-offs that you hadn't considered that you're like, once I think about that, maybe this isn't the best place for us to put our effort. So those are some of the tools we use. They're pretty simple, but they're very useful. And so we red team our plans all the time, daily, and that's the reason why. Is because we want to execute on the best possible plan. So we talked over the last few days about that we explore options, and we test our assumptions, we exploit our successes, we maintain options, and then we red team the plan. That's pretty much, you guys over the last few days and over the last several weeks, we've gone through a lot of the same planning processes that we do. I hope that this information has been useful for you. I've truly enjoyed my time in northern New Mexico, as I know the rest of our team has. We're glad we're here to help. And I hope you all get good rain, not too much rain, and that you have a safe and peaceful summer. So with that, I'll end my last operational update. Thank you.